Hey, it's Missy.
It's April.
And this is SheelaNaGig. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Each week, of course, we explore our own SheelaNaGig. To us, that is a woman whose strength and perseverance has led her to greatness, who empowers us, inspires us. It's somebody maybe you've heard of.
Or somebody you haven't heard of, but should.
Yeah. Or maybe you need to know more or know a different story.
Yeah,
the true story about somebody.
The true story.
Yeah, that's always kind of shocking, some of the things we find. But we're just glad you're here today. Thanks for tuning in. How are you, April? I haven't seen you in a long time.
Yeah, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Other than this little bit of like shoulder and neck injury.
Yeah, Missy's going, I'm good. She's like grabbing her shoulder. She's hunched over. She's a little like off kilter there.
I feel like an old person. I don't know what the fuck happened.
I'm sorry.
I know. And I didn't do anything specific. I did have something lovely on Saturday when I'm just giving a shout out to Hotel Joaquin. It's a vintage hotel. It's beautiful. Ooh. With this like Mediterranean style pool. It overlooks the ocean. We met some very nice people who work there.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah, it was just great. So I highly recommend it. Go on to Resort Pass and go to Hotel Joaquin. You'll do yourself a favor. You'll love it.
Yes. Yeah.
What else is going on?
Well, as you know, on Sunday, I went to see the play in Long Beach, The Revolutionists.
I know, and I'm so bummed I had to miss it.
Oh, well, let me tell you, you really missed a great performance. And this was a play written by Lauren Gunderson. We interviewed the director and one of the actors in one of our recent episodes called The Revolutionists. And we hadn't seen the play, or I hadn't seen the play yet. And I just want to comment, and I actually want to comment a bit. I'm going to be a little verbose.
Oh, good. I love it when you're verbose.
So they call it a comedy. And it started out very light and, funny and entertaining in a ha-ha-ha way. Nothing deep and profound. You go to a play called The Revolutionists and you're thinking badass women. And that was how it was billed. And it reminded me of a pot of water boiling, where at first it's room temperature and it's a little tepid and then it gets hotter and hotter. And by the end, it was so hot, nobody was laughing anymore in a good way. It was really profound. It was really about reimagining three women from history and a composite historical character based on a free Haitian activist who was rebelling against Haitian slavery during the French Revolution. And the characters are reimagined. And the character of Olympe de Gouges starts out kind of flaky and self-important and arrogant, and she's just looking for a win as a playwright, which wasn't really what Olympe de Gouges stood for in history, but the play kind of depicted her that way in the beginning. And they had Charlotte Corday, who was executed Murat, and Marie Antoinette, and these three women, as we know from history, died at the guillotine. But as these three women are reimagined in this play, there's a progression. Two of them, Corday and this composite character that they called Marianne Agenel, are serious revolutionists. They mean business. They're not screwing around. But Marie Antoinette was delightfully Marie Antoinette. And the character of Olympe de Gouges was at first not very committed to the revolution. Again, this is kind of a rebranding of her initially. And by the end, they let Marie Antoinette be Marie Antoinette in a very insightful, brilliant, poignant way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and at first it looked like she was all fluff, and she was all fluff as we think about her. But in her fluff, what her fluff revealed was something that had a lot more depth. The play had a lot of depth. Anyway, I'm going on and on. That's not even my Sheela. It's not even my point.
No, but it's so interesting since I didn't get to see it, and I'm super bummed I didn't get to see it.
Yeah, it was really good. Unfortunately, it closed, but if anybody has a chance to see Lauren Gunderson's play, The Revolutionists, please make it a point of seeing it. It was really poignant. It was well performed. It was well written. Hats off to this cast. And it left me, I have a Sheela today, and on the surface of things, and maybe even beyond deeper than the surface, Olam de Gouges has nothing to do with my Sheela for today. But I'm going to start off with Olam de Gouges.
Okay.
Because the play inspired me that much. And you know the expression, you could please some of the people some of the time, but you can't please all of the people all of the time?
Yep.
So de Gouges lost her head, literally, under the guillotine because she was outspoken and she wrote things that inflamed men during the French Revolution. And eventually that cost her life. But she really believed in what she was writing, and one of the things that the play really tried to say is even if we die, if we put this work out here, if we make these bold statements, if we are true to our message, then the message lives on. The message lives beyond us. We don't die for anything. And I thought about that. I mean, I feel a little silly comparing this to my Sheela, who is Belle Burden. And the thing about Belle Burden is she wrote a memoir called Strangers, a memoir of a marriage or a marriage. And initially, before that memoir, she actually wrote a modern love essay in the New York Times that went absolutely viral, and it was called Strangers. They entitled it Strangers. It came out in 2023.
Okay.
And basically what it's about, I mean, it's really from her life. Early in the pandemic, Belle Burden is a woman of means, and she and her husband had a vacation home in Martha's Vineyard. And early in the pandemic, they have 3 children. The son stayed back in New York, but their 2 daughters, their husband and Belle Burden, went to Martha's Vineyard to quarantine in the pandemic in this lovely vacation home. And she gets a call, and I can't remember if she actually spoke to the guy or he left a message, but basically the message was that your husband is having an affair with my wife.
Oof. And you hear about those calls.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, well, she couldn't imagine.
Ugh, it's awful.
And she'd been married for 20 years, and she understood her marriage to be a successful one. She would describe it as she's happily married. And she confronts her husband, and he admits to the affair, but that night he kind of says, the affair meant nothing, and I'm sorry, and, please forgive. And, she's just still reeling from that. When she wakes up the next morning, and by the next morning, he's announced that he wants a divorce. He's leaving her. He's going back to New York City. And interestingly enough, the breakup, although he doesn't say much about why he wants a divorce or why he's ending a 20-year marriage that she thought was perfectly fine, it wasn't really very much about this other woman, although there was a little drama with that. Anyway, my point being, Belle Burden ultimately wrote a essay, and that got published in Modern Love. And Modern Love is a very competitive column. You don't get published easily. It was very well written, and it went viral. When it went viral, while women were just praising her rawness, her honesty, the empathy that women were taking from it, there was some backlash. There was a little bit of backlash about, on a couple of accounts. So they felt like Belle Burden only presented one side of the story, like what was her husband's side. But of course, she really didn't know.
Right.
She had very little information about where he was coming from and whether he's had many affairs, this one affair, whether it was about the affair. And they also accused her of overlooking obvious signs that there must have been about trouble in the marriage and da-da-da-da-da. And there were some people that picked up on the fact that this is a woman of means, that she's living, they have a swanky apartment in Tribeca, which is a fashionable part of New York, and a vacation home in Martha's Vineyard. And so there was a little bit of, you poor rich bitch, don't cry.
Yeah.
And, so there was some backlash. She goes on to publish the full memoir. And the memoir, which was published in January of 2026, just sort of became like this overnight, they call it a runaway publishing phenomenon of the year.
Wow.
It debuted as #1 in the Times hardcover nonfiction list. And, she exploded as a modern day heroine. And before I get to what happened, I want to say that, and you may think, well, okay, why did we start talking this off by talking about Olam de Gouche? And very loosely, and I apologize because Olam de Gouche lost her head and Belle Burden made lots of money on this, memoir, I'm sure. They're not exactly equivalent heroines. But I'm going to say that when you write something, when you take a stand and you put it in writing and you tell a story, there are going to be people that it really resonates and matters to. And then there are always going to be the naysayers or the people who don't care or the people who feel threatened by it.
Sure.
And so I think that one of the things that really captured my thoughts and have made me kind of spin for a while here is just sort of the idea that whatever your stand is, whether you're fighting for women's rights in the French Revolution, in a male-dominated, misogynist society, or you're talking about the shock of being left after a 20-year marriage that you thought was good, they may not be the moral equivalent in terms of content, but there is a bravery in putting something down and having it published.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so Belle Burden writes this best-selling memoir, and she has a lot of fans. She's going on talk shows, and in the memoir...
How old is she at this point?
I think she's in her 40s, early 40s.
Okay.
She's got... her children are like teen years. The eldest, the son, is like close to graduating from high school.
Okay.
And what happens is, in the memoir, she writes more about the financial issues of her life and of what she describes as financial peril from the divorce. And New York Magazine ended up doing quite the journalistic expose on the veracity and accuracy of how she depicts her finances.
Yeah, because it's hard to imagine. I'm just thinking, she's a woman of means. They have these 2 giant houses. Granted, maybe he doesn't want to give her as much as she deserves or would like.
Well, I'll get to it.
Okay,
I'll get to that. But
because right away I'm wondering,
yes.
What is that? What does that look like, really? Yeah.
And that's a common reaction.
Yeah.
I mean, just people in general said, wait a minute, this is a woman who has quite a bit of finances. And her husband leaves her. She wasn't expecting that. But how tragic is she? Okay? So the New Yorker magazine comes out with this article, and they describe Strangers as a well-written memoir about how the end of a relationship can cast everything that came before it into shadows and uncertainty. It captures the panic and sorrow of suddenly not being able to recognize the person you're closest to. Before the New Yorker magazine investigated Burden's financials from her divorce document, she generated a ton of fans and, like I said, more than a few detractors. But in fact, the essay in Modern Love from the New York Times resulted in a lot of criticisms about why her husband might have left her. And, what happened was they were both attorneys when they married. And she, when she had 3 children, became a stay-at-home mom, although she did do pro bono legal work. So she was still using her skills. And she was accused, because she wasn't working, including by her gynecologist in the memoir, of being uninteresting because she didn't keep a job. So readers, kind
That's
of...
awful. Uninteresting because she's a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah, so...
It's a huge sacrifice.
It is.
In any circumstance.
It is.
Yeah.
So, there was backlash, there were presumptions. People did react to the fact that she's a woman of means. And to be a little bit more specific about that, Belle Burden is a descendant on her father's side of Cornelius Vanderbilt, and that was the real railroad and shipping titan kind of guy, And on her mother's side, she's a descendant of Henry Morgan Tilford, one of the founders of Standard Oil.
Got you. So she came to the marriage independently wealthy already,
She did.
like. Okay.
Yeah.
Was he from a wealthy family?
So that was interesting. He was initially from a wealthy family, and they lost their wealth. And his father was shamed. If I'm remembering right, he may have even done something illegal and gone to prison. So there was like there were definitely dark shadows from his history. He was bright. He became an attorney, and he later on in the marriage became, got into hedge fund management.
Sure.
So he made quite an excellent living for himself by the time they were divorcing, or the time that he left. And in the book, a lot of her fans, and I would say I consider myself among them, she portrayed herself as financially naive and deferential to the romantic idea that we're getting married, this is forever, so whatever is mine is his. And, I think a lot of women go into that.
Mike and I do keep our money separate. We always have. And I like that we keep our money separate.
Yeah.
But I do feel like I can be a little bit naive about, it's ours, it all works out.
Yes. And marriage kind of sets you up for that.
It does.
It's the idea that we're lifelong partners.
Yeah.
The idea that most people get married with the idea that this is till death do us part,
right.
whether it is or isn't.
Right.
And a lot of people, whether you merge your finances or not, you're a team. You were sharing a roof, we have children, we have whatever together.
Sure.
So the controversy starts with the prenup, and I'll elaborate on the prenup in a minute. But the controversy about the finances centers mostly on the 2 properties that they had, the apartment in Tribeca and the house, the vacation home on Martha's Vineyard. And it turns out that both of them were purchased by Belle Burden.
Okay.
She had a multi-million-dollar, I think it may have sold. But anyway, there's a multi-million-dollar apartment in New York City's fashionable Tribeca area, as I mentioned, and the pricey lake house on Martha's Vineyard. And Burden, in her book, claims the money came for both of these homes from 2 different trusts that were left to her by her parents and grandparents. And she writes that she liquidated in their entirety both of those trusts when she purchased each of those properties. And even though she purchased them outright, she listed her husband on both of the deeds out of this naive desire to demonstrate commitment. This is our home. This isn't my home. This is our home. And I think that women really were relating to this idea of trusting, of not being skeptical, of maybe not looking out or considering what's happening down the road. Yeah, I would do that too. I think that a lot, and I don't think this is exclusive to women. I think many men feel that way too.
Sure.
So Burden decided to place her husband, as I mentioned, on both deeds. And she wrote, I thought that's what you do when you married, share everything. So when she and her husband, and she calls him James in the book, and his last name is actually Davis, Henry Davis. It's really easy to look up who is Belle Burden's actual ex-husband. It wasn't James. But when Davis and Burden split up, he had 50% stake in both of those homes at the time of the divorce proceeding, and it looked like he was going to lay claim to both. And in the book,
Well, what a jerk he is.
Well, he left them. When he left, he said, I don't want custody of the children. I don't want to be involved in the day-to-day life. He didn't really offer much explanation or feedback about what happened.
Painful. So sad for those kids to lose their dad like that. And you know what? The thing is, so many families have been through this.
Yes.
You hear about this story time and time and time again.
That is why I believe both the article in the Times and the book, the memoir, went viral, and she has so many fans.
I'm sure.
That
so relatable.
This is relatable, this is resonating, and, most of us can't fathom the kind of money that we're talking about, but the circumstances of this breakup and how that happened is difficult. So at the time that they were getting married, they had a prenup, and he wanted a clause added that Belle Burden's lawyer was objecting to. He didn't like it, or she didn't like it. The attorney didn't like it. And that clause stipulated that all income and investments made during their marriage would remain separate unless placed in a joint name. So unless her husband actually said, this belongs to Belle Burden and myself, they were his assets.
Ugh.
Now, let me say, this isn't so black and white, but she made the decision although her attorney advised against the stipulation, she went ahead with it. She agreed to it. So they married in 1999, and what was in the memoir was that they both agreed to share household expenses, but Burden, who was an attorney and then later became, as I said, a stay-at-home mom, had no claim to her husband's income in the event of their divorce, and likewise, he would have no claim on her, including any inheritance that she received. So basically, what the New York Magazine in their expose exposed is that Burden had other assets from her family's wealth. And that although she said in the book and in many interviews that if he exercised his claim to the two properties that she paid for, that she naively put his name on the deeds to, she couldn't afford to pay him back. They'd end up having to sell those homes. And those homes were the homes of their children. And some people, and certainly I think the New Yorker magazine took a deep dive into the disingenuousness of this, given how many financial assets Belle Burden actually had, that she didn't necessarily lay out and specify in the book. Okay? And so I think that the New York Magazine was a real drop-the-mic moment and brought into question how truthful her situation was and her accounts were, and that she was being deceptive and all this stuff. What was interesting was when the book was coming out, it was required that he approve of what the book said, and he only made 2 requests for changes.
Why was it required that he approved what the book said?
Because of litigation. They didn't want to print anything that he was going to sue them for libel or, that kind of thing. And he only requested 2 changes, and one she made and one she didn't make. So he didn't really stipulate a lot or contest a lot. So when, in the end of the day, we're not sure how accurate her account is versus the finance. The other thing was, although he was making 7 figures working in hedge fund as a hedge fund manager when they divorced, and she was entitled to none of that, he was paying substantial child support. And the amount of child support was in addition to paying for private schools. I mean, so there was a lot of money that she wasn't really copping to. And although he wasn't paying part of alimony for a non-working spouse, the fact is she had other financial means that he was not privy to. And he was paying child support. Okay. So in the memoir. She describes them going to trial over the issue of these two properties. And what she writes is that in the 11th hour, just before they were going to court, he backs down and rescinds his claim to the two properties so that the two properties were safeguarded for the children.
Okay.
What the New Yorker magazine says is usually in situations like this, there would be an agreement, number one, that the kids could stay in the house and the property not sold until the youngest comes of age. And secondly, there was no real court appearance. There was a hearing that was pretty standard in divorces, and it appeared that it was something like a status conference that they were about to have, and that was where it appears that he let go of the idea of claiming his stake in the properties. So the allegation leveraged against Belle Burden was you were never really at a risk of losing those properties, that you didn't go to court, that you really exaggerated this. And in many of the interviews that she had after the book's popularity and all this stuff, is that she really played up the emotional side of, kind of like her victimization of this threat.
Yeah.
And actually, in the end, Burden actually placed the Tribeca apartment on the market last year for just under $12 million, which was about 3 times what she paid for it. And the Martha's Vineyard house was recently assessed by the town, according to the New Yorker magazine, for about $7.7 million, which was well over the $2 million more than what Burden had paid for it when she purchased it.
Okay, good for her.
Okay?
Yeah.
This is my point, and this is kind of what I really wanted to talk about. To me, and to the many people who have stayed loyal to Belle Burden and her well-written memoir, this really isn't about financial wealth. What resonated to me and what resonated to, I think, a lot of women, and even to you as I'm talking about this story, wasn't so much her financial peril, but it was the vulnerability that she had putting her husband on the deeds, assuming she was in a happy marriage. She's a rare exception in the fact that she has extreme wealth, and probably from a financial standpoint, nobody needs to stay up and worry about Belle Burden. But from an emotional standpoint, what resonated was this guy that she thought she was partnered with really left her children too. I mean, they had some relationship. He did have some relationship with the kids, but it's more like a Disneyland dad. He gets together occasionally to do nice things, but not really in their day-to-day lives.
Oh, it's so sad.
In a statement, Belle Burden said, "When I wrote Strangers, I shared my heartache, my mistakes, and my shame. I owed my privilege as plainly as I could, and I respected the privacy of sealed court records. I stand by everything I wrote, including the fear I felt from my ex-husband's threats, the contributions I made and could make to my family, and what happened to me financially and emotionally in my marriage and in my divorce. While I didn't attend it, I'm glad that women have taken my story as motivation for insisting on financial transparency in their marriage." In Burden's Modern Love column, published 3 years ago, she barely really mentions the money at all. But the specter of financial jeopardy is key to elements of the memoir. After the book's publication, as the All Points media campaign has gathered momentum, the narrative has attuned itself even more to the money and the lack of it. But what her fans say, what I say, is the emotional story is true. Even if she took liberties, even if she let assumptions sound more dramatic than they were. Many fans argue that the heart of the memoir was never about the net worth, but about betrayal, abandonment, and shock.
Yes.
And that fear and financial vulnerability are not necessarily the same as poverty.
Right.
That's
a good point. Now, that's a valid point, sure.
And that it was actually interesting to me to listen to somebody who had financial means way above anything that I can imagine. And she does talk about being looked frowned upon in her elite country club membership. And at one point there was a question of whether she could keep her Martha's Vineyard elite country club membership. And, part of you going, you poor rich bitch kind of thing. But it doesn't change the fact that in her world, she was shunned, just like any of us in our less privileged worlds might feel shunned if our husbands leave us and people take sides or people make assumptions.
Right.
And she really strikes that chord, even though she may be talking about a world that is well above our world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And another thing to consider, and I do a lot of creative nonfiction writing, is memoir isn't journalism. It's not about the facts, but it is about the memory and the emotional life of an experience.
Sure.
It doesn't claim to be that.
Right.
So while some of Burden's former admirers have really expressed disappointment, their criticism is less about the divorce itself and more about the book was marketed as a cautionary tale about women facing financial ruin. They argue that readers were led to believe that Burden was in a far more precarious financial situation than she was. One commentator summarized the situation by noting that, unlike the memoir scandals where readers felt completely deceived, many of Burden's fans appear willing to overlook the financial discrepancies because of the emotional core of the story that still feels authentic. Mm-hmm. So going back to Olam de Gouche, sorry, who courageously stuck her neck out, with no pun intended, to write willfully and provocatively about women in an entirely different way, writing a declaration of women's right. She was certainly much more nobler and heroic than Belle Burden, but I really just wanted to explore in this episode just sort of what any of us dare to put down in writing when we are really representing whatever is in our hearts, whatever it is that we want to write.
Right.
There will always be the people that maybe it resonates with, or we hope that there will be.
Sure.
And there will always be detractors, people who don't get it or people who oppose it. And so I made her my Sheela for today, Belle Burden, because she wrote well. I think that she wrote emotionally honestly. Mm-hmm. It wasn't sappy. It wasn't very victim-y. It was a balanced experience of a woman who was caught unaware.
Right.
And who did suffer.
She was the voice of all these women who've been, victimized.
Yeah.
By these situations.
Yes.
With these husbands who suddenly cheat on them and are just... I mean, it's so sad. It's unbelievable to have the bottom drop out like that.
Yeah.
But like you said, very relatable. Mm-hmm. And, she's become the voice for these women. That's what's so great about it. That is a Sheela. That's absolutely Sheela. And putting the money aside, like you said, that's not even part of the equation.
But if it does make other women look at their own financial situations and where they may lay themselves vulnerable or be too trusting or that kind of thing, then yay, good for Belle Burden for shining that light.
Yes, absolutely, because that is important. It makes me think, like, I should know, more what's going on.
I think that I could say the same. My husband's a CPA, and he handles a lot of our finances, and it's easy to just ignore what the heck we're doing. And yet I know there have been times where we've talked about things and I had to intervene and insist we do something different because he's very wise and informed about finances, but he's also very conservative to the point of stupidity at times, right? Because he's worried.
Yeah.
We all have an obligation to wake up.
We do, definitely. I think about my own mother. My mom had grown up wealthy and my dad had grown up pretty middle class. They married and my mom kind of expected a nice lifestyle. She expected my dad would give her a nice life. And he was on the rise. He was very smart. He was kind of a self-made man. He eventually bought his own business, was doing quite well. But my mom had been a teacher, but once she had kids, she became a stay-at-home mom. In the end, it was my mother who decided that they should split up. I think my dad was a little broad-sided. He used to tell me, up until in his 80s, he was saying, I never chose to leave your mom. She was the one, it's my biggest regret in life. I remember we were talking on the phone, he was talking about when Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie split up. And I was like, why are you telling me?
He's relating.
Yeah, and he was so upset about it. And my dad didn't want to give her enough. My dad worked very hard and he became a self-made man. And my mom spent a lot of money too. Up until the time they did divorce, my mom was taking trips to Europe, like on his money. I think she felt that she deserved that. I think she felt, and on some level she probably did. You know, it's like, I don't want to make too many judgments here, but
I think that's part of the point.
Yeah.
Everybody brings to any situation their own perspective. And just because one person's perspective makes sense doesn't mean the opposite perspective doesn't make sense.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
And people's resentment, for example, of Belle Burden's wealth, that has nothing to do with anything about the memoir.
No, it doesn't.
You know?
It doesn't.
And the fact that she maybe was less than candid, less than honest, that she maybe leveraged popularity over the financial perils she felt.
Yes.
Again, that idea of just because she had a lot of money didn't mean that she didn't feel financial peril in her, within the context of her.
Of course. Within her context. Exactly. Yeah. And one of the interesting things I'm thinking about now too is my mom, I know I've told you this before, my mom inherited money from her mother's death.
Oh, yes.
And my dad was starting a new business and he assumed my mother was going to invest that money into his business. His business was struggling in the beginning. She went behind his back and bought a cabin on the lake in northern Michigan and didn't put his name on that cabin.
Under the heading of what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine.
Yes, that's and this was like 75, so she was definitely getting on board at that time with kind of the women's lib stuff.
Yes, and taking that one step further, kind of going back to what I've been thinking a lot about, is this idea of when you put that in writing, when you take a stand and you express something in writing, and especially in the era that we live in with social media where everybody has a megaphone to launch an opinion or to leverage a complaint.
Yes.
You know, for her, Belle Burden, the complaint started with the Modern Love column, which didn't even really get deeply into the finances, where people were just judging why he left and what she was being unreasonable or immature or blinded by. You know, opinions are like assholes. Somebody once said, everyone's got them, you know. But I just felt like she resonated something that was important for a lot of women. And I really, again, no alum de Pouge.
Yeah.
You know, but still a Sheela.
Yeah. Brave, courageous women, both of them.
Yeah, in their own ways.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and in a misogynist sort of environment, society, you know, not be afraid to go out there and say what they need to say and share it.
And I just also want to add that the way, I think I really admire the way she responded to the New Yorker magazine, and that was that she didn't. As best I could tell, nobody commented on it, and, you know, it was a news cycle and it died down. And I think her book is still a bestseller.
Wow,
So
that's good news. Yeah, and this could create a lot of controversy for our listeners, so we would love to hear what you think.
Oh yeah, please weigh in. And you know, I understand people may think I'm being ridiculous, and so I just invite your voices because it's an interesting conversation.
No, it is a conversation, and we always love it when you share your stories or, you know, your differences. I mean, that's important because that's the whole idea. This is a conversation. And we are really glad you tuned in and listened. I'm really glad that you brought her to the table today. This is very interesting.
I was so intrigued by the whole, the thought about it that I just really wanted to share it talk about it with you.
Yeah.
Not even so much to present
originally?
it. She was originally from, I believe, New York. Yeah. And if you're interested, her memoir is really a good little window. I mean, it's a little voyeuristically into how the other half lives.
Yeah.
You know, she certainly doesn't hide that she's a person of means.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
Please comment. Please subscribe. We love your reviews. They really help us a lot. So please do that and continue to listen and tell your friends and share the SheelaNaGig podcast. We really appreciate it. And until next time, bye.
Bye.
Sheela, unabashed in your glow.